Welcome to EPG Pathshala. We are going to do a module on feminist social work practice, a key concept that is participation. This is part of the course on gender and social work. I am Dr. Shuli Kumar, Associate Professor in School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. The topics to be discussed in this particular module is development and participation, because development is intimately connected to the way participation is located, the concepts, the emergence of participatory development, participation from within, participation in research and participation in governance. And then we will summarize the entire module in the end of this particular lecture. Let's try and understand development and participation as a key concept, which are very important to actually understand the politics of participation in most countries. Development became a major concern and national priority for post-colonial states in the context of the end of Second World War. And development as a concept also came about post-Second World War. It was coined as a term by Harry Truman to say that certain countries are left behind and are underdeveloped while certain countries are developed. So in itself there was a political agenda which was flagged in this process. Development goals were intricately tied to the state. That state is responsible to ensure development of the people and the nation was completely put in the middle, and also was reflected in the Nehruvian socialist model of planning and governance in India. When we took up the notion of development, clearly post-independence it was thought that it has to be both a socialist and capitalist, and thereby we went into a mixed economy model in our planning and governance. Incorporating diverse ethnic and religious groups in the new nations has been and was a serious challenge, with force often being used by the state to marginalize several of these groups so that a certain kind of development could be taken forward. For example, even in the US, the Native Americans were pushed back into reservations while the rest of the nation developed. The Native Indians or Americans were left behind in the reservation, and they continue to do so even today. So they are not developed and the rest of the nation is developed. So this notion of development in itself continues to be problematic. In the 60s and the 70s, new social movements were emerging the world over to protest state violence and control. So as a backlash of the kind of development that was being adopted, there were several new social movements that came about organically from these different diverse groups who said that this kind of development is not acceptable. State-led development was being challenged, and there were calls for democratic inclusion for marginalized section, even in India, way back from the independent movement, which were based on caste, gender and race. Development in terms of theory, policy and practice was continuously questioned and critiqued from many theoretical standpoints, be it feminism, be it dependency theory, be it post-development theories and post-colonial theories. They all critique the top-down, linear, standardized and gender-unaware imposition of development whose benefits are supposed to trickle down to the community. In itself, it's a very hegemonic construct. The development trajectory that was adopted said that a particular kind of standardized, elitist and programmatic intervention will be done, and therefore the fruits of it will trickle down to the minority or the marginalized. This was critiqued by many of these theoretical standpoints, and especially feminist standpoints as well, to say that this is not development, this is more of reinforcement of hegemonic patriarchy, hegemonic notions of what is development or what is constructed as development and what is constructed as privileging of the already existing powerful in the societies. Gender in development theories question the gender unaware understanding of development, and it works now towards integrating gender issues, issues of gender identities and relations, as well as their diverse lived realities and contribution within the development discourse. So what we now talk about from the feminist parlance is development discourse rather than development in itself. So in itself, development has lost its hegemonic standing to become a discourse and a question and a constantly engaged with concept. At the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995, some of the key points of the declaration included the recognition of women's rights as human rights, their entitlements as equal rights, a recognition of their contribution to development, rights to equal participation in decision making, to live a life free of poverty, violence and discrimination, and the right to realize their full potential and aspirations. In doing so, the Fourth World Conference squarely brought into the forefront that what is happening as development at that point of time and even today is not what is required. It is significant to bring into the forefront and engage with the notion of gender in all its diverse locations and diversities. One of the key points of the declaration related to women's participation is that it is essential to design, implement and monitor with the full participation of women effective, efficient and mutually reinforcing gender-sensitive policies and programs, including development policies and programs at all levels that will foster the empowerment and advancement of women. The key concepts here are participation, empowerment and advancement of women. And that is something that we need to keep in mind while we are understanding participation. At this conference, gender mainstreaming was officially adopted by the UN Millennium Development Goal as a third goal that aims to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment. Emergence of participatory development. That is where, while the fourth conference on women was happening, there was a backdrop through which participation became a key concept. In the backdrop of powerful social movements like civil rights movement in the US, national movement in Asia and Africa, women and socialist movements in India and many other such movements all over the world, there was this understanding that somewhere we need participatory democracy. We are leaving out a large number of our population, we are leaving out a large number of women within these locations and within these population, and therefore whatever democratic processes, whatever development trajectories we need to adopt, they have to ensure participation and inclusion of these people. Participatory development began to make subtle inroads in the mainstream development discourse. So gradually, whatever discourse of development was happening, participation as a concept and participatory development as a core idea began to percolate and began to make inroads in different ways through anthropological and sociological engagements. Earlier it was only a political concept, but as sociological and anthropological critique of development began to emerge, began to flag these diversities, participatory development began to displace the earlier notions, hegemonies of development. Participation from within began to be discussed in this process. So if a participatory development had to be talked about, or even participatory democracy had to be talked about, people needed to be engaged with. How would you include participation? How would you include people? If there is a development that is happening that has denied or negated their knowledge as significant, their skills as insignificant, and their ways of life as insignificant. So how will we ensure their participation, and how will we also talk of inclusion and the ways in which to change the pathways of development? So therefore, the constant power dynamic that is operating in a community needs to be therefore engaged with when we are talking of participation. There is a power dynamic that happens in the ways in which caste and gender and class get structured, say in village economy or in an urban municipality. It works its way in people's way of communication, people's ways in which systems function. So we need to also understand how this works and how therefore these need to be unpacked to make participation a reality. So when this is engagement that happens, there have been movements that have brought this in the forefront as experiences and practical applications. So for example, the Bhumi Sena is a useful example to illustrate how participation can rise from within the community. It began as a movement of the tribal community in Maharashtra in 1970 to claim land, and which because moneylenders were squeezing over the ways in which tribal community was living. So the Bhumi Sena uprising started demanding land rights and better ways to live, and also redemption from the clutches of the moneylenders. Similarly, the Chipko Andolan in 1970s in the Himalayas also resisted the commercial logging that was being done of the trees in that area, and this was part of a wider movement and spread to other parts of India and became a symbol of women's empowerment. This was basically because the women's lives revolved around gathering fuel and fodder and also ensure domestic work and livelihoods of women in the Himalayas. So when they found that the trees were being commercially logged and sold and there was environmental degradation, their livelihoods were threatened. So they came together to protect the trees and demand that such a rule and such a policy needs to be rolled back, and in many ways they succeeded to an extent at that point of time. And this is how participation from within can be seen and engaged with in popular movements against oppressive policies. Participation can also be done in feminist research. This is very critical component of feminist practice, because no feminist practice can happen in isolation. It's important to have feminist research and which iterates into movement and action, and has been one of the USPs of the feminist movement in India. Participation in vital components of social research, particularly when it comes to researching the needs and concerns of vulnerable and marginalized groups, is essential. The principles of such ethical research includes informed consent, maintaining confidentiality and sensitivity, and ensuring that the voices of the people are included, who in itself often inform what is to be researched and what is not to be researched, which means again the reflexivity from part of the researcher, the understanding of the researcher as a powerful as using power and trying not to use the power and trying to make the participant an equal participant in the process of the research. Therefore, participatory methodology is now being used to ensure that participants are equal respondents in shaping that research, informing that research, and finalizing the research outcomes and findings. Gender audits is one such example in which participatory rural appraisals can also be used. Gender audits can be utilized in engaging stakeholders in systems, institutions, as well as in local governance and politics. And these are adopted to understand gender needs and concerns in community around safety, access to resources, and political participation. So they bring in how, in which ways hierarchies and gender hierarchies are there, how they can be shaped, how they can be reconstructed and reformulated to become more non-hierarchical, and also provide spaces for divergent voices of women, specifically from marginalized groups. So it can also inform policy programmatic change as well as the ways in which organizations function and the governance structures function, to take forward gender mainstreaming and promote gender equality and equity within these structures. So one of the ways is gender audits, and there are many other ways in which participatory research is done. For example, dialogical processes rather than interviews. Where we have conversations or discourse analysis or discourses with the participants, whereby there is a process of conversation where the participant informs what needs to be collected in that particular issue. For example, if one is talking to a violated woman about her experiences of domestic violence, it is necessary to begin with her experience, which she may say is that, you know, my husband is nice and good. It's only when he drinks alcohol that he beats me up. It is important to keep that in the beginning, to really understand that that is how she sees her situation. It is not your reality, it is her reality. So therefore we move from there and then see how she understands the alcoholism of her husband, how she starts putting out boundaries in her relationship, and therefore then engages with her husband to reduce his alcoholism, and then also counter certain ways of violence and assert herself to say that this is acceptable norm and this is not acceptable as a behavior within that relationship. So this is another way of ensuring participation in research and hearing her voice out completely to understand how she has engaged and got empowered in that whole process. Participation and governance go hand in hand. It is often used as a tokenism in many documents. However, for participation to become meaningful, it has to be widened to include uniform forms of multi-scaled citizenship and also situated in local and grassroots engagement. Now, participation can be active, passive, or real. In many ways, when we have, for example, within the local governance system of the panchayat or the municipality, Gram Sabhas are compulsory to be held. So when women come in large numbers in the Gram Sabha, it is projected as participation of women. Now that is actually passive participation, because they are not acting as citizens. They are not asking questions based on informed understanding. They are also not flagging their own specific concerns in the Gram Sabha and saying that this is what we need. So that cannot be considered as participation. Participation is when women actively demand from the Gram Panchayat certain services, certain programmatic interventions for their specific needs as well as for their local needs. They also ensure that there is gender equality within these processes, and they also become effective leaders within the local governance system. So we have heard the terminology Pati Sarpanch. So while we have the 73rd and 74th Amendment in the Indian Constitution, whereby women's participation and women leadership in the local governance is ensured. However, even when women elected representatives are there present, the major decisions of what is needed to be done at the level of the village, it is decided by their husbands or their father-in-laws. So that cannot be considered as participation of elected women leadership, or it cannot be considered as empowerment of women. What is required is that these women understand that as sarpanches or as ward panches, what are they supposed to do, and how are they supposed to do, and how are they supposed to assert for their rights as women, as Gram Panchayat leaders, as well as make their voices heard in the power corridors of the administration of the local governance, which includes the block level offices as well as the district magistrate's office. So in many ways, it goes with the understanding that participation of women can only be effective if they have knowledge, they have appropriate skills of engagement, and they are also able to assert themselves, and they are able to articulate and communicate effectively at different levels of governance within the state. So participation and governance therefore also need to ensure citizenship of these women, and that truly they are informed and elect appropriate leaders within the political system of the country. One of the most effective tools that has been used time and again by, so this is as a separate point, one is flagging, because it's critical for us to remember that while one works, women's movement works with the ensuring participation at the grassroots and local levels, and also works with the different ways at the political levels, there are legislations and laws that can enable the process and ensure that it becomes a systemic change. So public interest litigation is a very useful mechanism for positive citizen participation, and this can be illustrated in two positive cases in India, that is the Right to Food campaign and the recent landmark judgment of decriminalization of homosexuality between consenting adults in terms of the High Court order. The Right to Food campaign has led to the National Food Security Act, and it has also therefore led to the further development of maternity benefit for all women who will get rupees 6,000 at the grassroots for their maternity needs. So this is a path-breaking process, and public interest litigation can often form a very effective tool for ensuring and developing participatory democracy in the country. So in summation, there are several ways of making participation meaningful and exploring its transformational scope as explained in this module. It can help in designing for projects appropriate to the local socio-political context, and can contribute to making or breaking of the initiative. If participation is kept as a central theme, then the project will work very effectively. But if people's participation, women's participation is not kept in mind, and effective and active participation is not kept in mind, the project outcomes may not be what it has set itself out for. Participatory approaches require an in-depth understanding of the power dynamics of the community where a project is planned, and therefore a careful analysis needs to be done of that, and therefore before undertaking any exercise on project planning, a quick audit, a gender audit, can help to understand this power dynamics. To enhance participation, mechanisms of accountability and transparency can be utilized for devolution of power as and when it should be. Participants must be given adequate information and knowledge, and also certain assertion practices and exercises need to be done. So it is important and significant to understand that participation does not come on its own. Participation has to be facilitated, and catalysts have to be utilized to make the voices of the marginalized heard in different ways. What is important is to engage with the people. So when gender audits are being conducted, to build a framework or a baseline for it, engaging with women at different levels, especially within marginalized communities, having discussions and dialogues in groups and in individual levels to understand their locations, understand where they see themselves, understand what are the possibilities of inputting assertive skills, inputting various informations, and inputting and working with co-creation of knowledge becomes very important. So as I mentioned earlier, doing effective research, which is using participatory tools, is a critical way to ensure effective participation of the stakeholders in any project or any programmatic intervention. In that process, many of the marginalized groups and women get empowered. because they understand and they locate what is oppressing them and what needs to be done to unpack that oppressive structure. As an external practitioner, perhaps I cannot or you cannot understand what that oppression is and how those structures work. The best informed people are the oppressed people themselves. So when we work with them, through workshops and consultative processes and training programs, one is able to understand how this works, and they are able to come up with many different ways to engage with these oppressive structures. And that then leads to active participation in the ways in which the project can be formulated itself. The ways in which it can interact with the systems. So project formulation from the very beginning should have participation as a key principle, and ensure that the voices of these people, the ways in which women understand their locations, ensure that the project is implemented in strategic ways. So it is about consultative mechanisms, it is about breaking through hegemonies of power, it is about ensuring that the last person in the area is heard, visibilized and included, and thereby then participatory processes become strong enough to ensure empowerment of marginalized women and marginalized communities. Some of the references that you can look at, especially when you are wanting to look at development discourse, the most important book that you can look at is Understanding the Development Dictionary, which brings in many different development discourses. You can also look at some of the writings by Robert Chambers on livelihoods and participatory development processes and PRAs. You can look at some of the work of Nanda, who needs post-development discourses of difference, and green revolution, agrarian populism, because that again underscores the ways in which development discourses are done. And you can also look at the myth of the community by Irene Gudgit, and which talks about how gender needs to be flagged within development projects, programmatic interventions and processes, and rural development projects. So these are some of the books that you can use to understand participatory techniques and why participation and active participation is important in feminist social work practice. Thank you.